This is Katrin with Disability Rights New York. Welcome to our podcast, Empire State of Rights Closed Captioned. We are here to bring you information on the most relevant topics regarding disability rights and advocacy. Today, we will be discussing common service animal myths. And before we get started today, I'd like to give a special shout out to our follower, Darlene, for requesting this podcast series on service animals. In this series, we will be discussing the legal role of service animals, legal protections, common myths and misconceptions, etiquette, and differences with emotional support animals. Make sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube to follow the full series. Today, we're talking with Christy Asbee, PAAT, PATBI, and PAVA Director here at DRNY. We're going to discuss the subject of service animals and misconceptions about them. Hi, Christy. How are you today?
Good, thanks.
So it's interesting. Last week, we had an article about the DOT starting to make some changes regarding service animals, and it kind of is changing the definition of what they can be and really narrowing that focus. Can you talk about what's happening with the DOT right now and what this is going to look like if these changes go through?
Yes. So the Department of Transportation, which is a federal agency, they oversee the regulations related to the Air Carriers Access Act. The DOT has put out some changes to the way they define service animals in the regulations, and that impacts people who use service animals or emotional support animals when they're flying.
And so one of the things that they're talking about is restricting what animals can actually be service animals and their size and where they can be located. Have you read the article, and can you tell us about what their definition is going to change to be?
Yeah, the definition is changing, and that's the predominant issue here. The DOT is putting out a substantially different definition of a service animal. In particular, it all but eliminates the use of emotional support animals. Currently, the regulations allow for airlines to define service animals to include in the definition emotional support animals. And generally speaking, most animals that can be recognized as emotional support animals, with the exception of a few. Spiders, reptiles, certain types of rodents are generally not recognized as emotional support animals. Therefore, they don't meet the definition of a service animal under the ACAA regulations. The regulations that are out for comment that the DOT is looking to get some feedback on are the service animals basically defined similar to the way it's defined under the Americans with Disabilities Act, where they recognize dogs as support animals generally, in some occasions, miniature horses. Now, the DOT narrows the definition of service dogs beyond the definition that the ADA provides. A service animal in these proposed regulations would be a dog, solely a dog, that's individually trained to do work, to perform tasks for the benefit of the qualified individual with the disability. And that can include physical, sensory, psychiatric, intellectual, or other mental disabilities. So they don't eliminate the psychiatric service dog, fortunately, but it limits the scope of the animals that an individual with a disability can access on an airplane.
And they're looking at dogs that are small enough to fit under your seat or underneath where your feet are on the seat. And especially when we're talking about miniature horses being used, the size of the animal is also part of its service for stability. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. So some people rely on miniature horses to help them with independent mobility. Some people need the stability that a miniature horse offers, or they have another need for a miniature horse. Now, miniature horses are sometimes larger than even the largest dogs. So yes, the size can impact an individual's ability to access a miniature horse. On an airplane, I think the consideration is the size at this point. They've limited the definition of what a service animal is to a dog so that they don't have to worry about the size issue. The dog must fit in a specific space, only within the foot space of the passenger. they're not providing any accommodation besides just giving you access to your service dog within your own confined space on the airplane.
So these are some pretty big changes. We're going to list the links to the articles as well as where you can comment. There will be a comment period that will be outlined in that article. So if you want to make some comments, please feel free to do that. We're looking for feedback as well on the comment section for our podcast and Facebook. So please do that. So let's get into some of the myths now, Christy. And some of them I think are part of why the DOT is looking at these regulations. So let's talk about service animals needing certificates or documentation as proof for accommodations. People might think that absolutely they need them and you need to present them. What's the true story on that?
There is no legally recognized certificate out there with regard to service dogs and service animals. There are lots of companies online that will take money in exchange for a certificate that has no legal significance. And there's some mixed feelings about this among the individuals that I've helped navigate service animal legal issues. Some people say, I just get the certificate because of the uninformed businesses or landlords who require a certificate that they don't understand has no legal significance. Other people are completely against it for reasons that we won't get into today, but it's a more of a fundamental issue with regard to a person's right to their service dog under the law. And the bottom line is that it's very clear that there is no certification process either in the state of New York or recognized by the federal government.
And that's a good point. This is such a huge subject, and we're just going to touch on some of the myths and misconceptions about this in this series. So similar to the certificates, there are some service animals that you'll see that have vests on that say service animal on them. So similarly, do they have any credentials that go along with those little vests and things like that? Or are they just something that maybe the handler feels more comfortable with?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the vests certainly serve a purpose. For a lot of service animals, the vest itself can be considered assistive technology for the individual with the disability who's benefiting from using the service animal. So in some cases, it's a specialized handle that they can use for example, many guide dogs wear a vest with a specific handle that's easy for the handler to hold. Some vests are for identification purposes so that the public will know that that's a working dog, that's not a pet, and don't go up and touch it and try to kiss it or pet it or whatever visceral response you have to seeing a lovely, well-behaved dog.
Right. And that's something that's really great to remember as an animal lover myself. Oftentimes you see an animal and you want to say hello, but it's always good to ask the handler, whether it's a service animal or not, if you can touch someone else's animal that is with them. So those are good things for everyone to remember. So as we talk about service animals and what they can and can't be, can it only be a dog? And does it have to be a particular breed? Does it have to be a retriever? Does it have to be a shepherd?
Yeah, there's no breed restrictions in federal law and in New York state law as well. The Department of Justice enforces the ADA, has made specific regulatory guidance that says the same. There may be local ordinances that prohibit certain types of dogs within a community, and those do not supersede the federal law. So what that means is if you have a service animal and the breed of your service animal is prohibited in your local jurisdiction, you can have the service animal regardless of that local ordinance, as long as the dog meets the definition of a service animal. And what's primarily considered when you're evaluating whether or not an animal is a service animal is looking at their behavior and making sure that their behavior is that they are acting in a way that is reasonable to think that the animal is under the handler's control. So it's not barking, jumping, whining, pawing at things, trying to eat everything on the floor, off of the floor, or acting hostile towards others. And then the second consideration for public sanitary purposes is that the dog is housebroken. So it's not using inside spaces as its bathroom.
Right. And so service animals, are they only for people who are blind or deaf? Or are they for other people that have a different disability?
A service animal is certainly not only available to people with specific types of disabilities. That's definitely not the case. However, I know that that is a very common misunderstanding. In fact, I have been in a situation with a client who had a service animal. We were actually leaving a building after having a hearing on the service animal issue. As we were leaving the building, the security stopped us and said, "Are you blind? You don't have a right to be with your service animal in this public building." Shocking, absolutely shocking. We were actually in the building on an issue trying to make sure that the dog could be incorporated in the public service that the individual was supposed to receive. And we were getting pushback from the security. So it's really important, this component of education, when you are considering how to make changes in people's perception. The first step is making sure that there is education and training at the, even at all levels of individuals who need to know about this information.
That's right, Christy. Education is such a crucial part of this whole process. And that's why we're happy to be able to do these podcasts to dispel some of these myths and bring the actual information out. And we just talked about whether or not service animals are limited to certain disabilities. Can you talk to us about some other instances where a service animal would be needed?
Yeah. So in the example that I just gave, that service animal was actually an autism service dog. So it served an individual who had autism. There are service animals that assist with people who have seizure disabilities, and these dogs are trained to detect when an individual might be having a seizure, or they alert in some way, so that the individual can seek help or whatever they need. There are psychiatric service animals for veterans. This is a very useful treatment option. Veterans who have experienced PTSD while in service or outside of service, they can access psychiatric service animals. There's actually a program within the Veterans Administration that provides certain services that get veterans psychiatric service animal.
So, Christy, we just talked a little bit about certificates and certifications and that they're not a real thing. And one of the misconceptions I think there is, especially when we're maybe going into a restaurant or a public place where there could be a no dogs allowed sign out in front and a business owner may demand to see some type of certification. Can we just, hit that home that what's the truth on that matter?
A business or government or an employer even. So anything that the ADA covers. So employment, public services, and government programs, as well as businesses open to the public, they can ask two questions. So when an individual goes in and they walk into an establishment with a dog or a miniature horse, and the establishment can ask, is this a service animal? And if the answer is yes, then what services does the dog perform? The dog or miniature horse perform?
And that's it.
That's it. And they cannot ask for certification. That is discriminatory behavior. And they cannot deny access because of health and safety reasons. And if the dog is, in fact, behaving like a service animal, and there's no other indication that the animal is not a service animal.
And can they ask what the person's disability is?
No, they can't. I mean, inherently, it is somewhat disclosed because of the second question that an establishment can ask is, what task does it perform? I think that there's some inferences that can be made, but that's something that the DOJ, the Department of Justice, has said that that's a question that can be asked. So I think, in fact, you may be disclosing by answering that question, but that's the law.
So it's important to know that the only two questions that can be asked should be asked in that order. And certainly you wouldn't be able to put another one in there that might supersede and ask about the disability.
Right. That's exactly right.
All right, so we just talked about how the service animal has to behave within public areas. Can you talk about under what circumstances a business owner would have the right to either exclude or ask a service animal to leave the establishment?
Yeah, so earlier on, I talked about the behavior of the service animal. That's really the deciding factor ultimately, because otherwise it would be so much more subjective. So there's room in the law that allows an establishment to deny a person's access to their service animal if the animal is misbehaving, like barking or jumping or sniffing all over, just causing some problems, not acting in a behaved, under control way. And then also, of course, if they're not housebroken, then they do not meet the definition of a service animal.
And so we just hit on some of the myths around service animals and where they can and can't be. And certainly it's always an ongoing conversation, especially with this new Department of Transportation proposal. A lot of these regulations look like they could be changing. But for the most part, since even the inception of the ADA almost 30 years ago, these myths have been kind of perpetuated, whether it's through media or television. Why else do you think that these myths exist? And what problems are really occurring because of these misconceptions?
Yeah, I mean, there's the unfortunate circumstance where people are trying to benefit from these regulations and these laws that allow an individual with a disability access to their service animal. And there's people who are disingenuous in how they characterize what would otherwise be a pet. I don't think that this issue is widespread and prolific, but the news media picks it up. It's a sensational story. And there are these outlying situations that sort of ruin the understanding for the public. So I work in this area of law every day. I understand the benefit that service animals offer my clients. It's life-changing, and it's a real issue right now because these stories are sensational. They spread very fast. They go viral. These stories about people abusing the system, and that has some real negative consequences. And that's really what has led to these conversations at the federal level. Especially, now we're looking at the Department of Transportation proposed regulations. In the proposal itself, it goes on for pages about these alleged abuses and these widespread issues, when I don't think that that's actually the case, but it certainly is tainting the conversation and tainting people's understanding of the laws and how this law is really crucial for people with disabilities who benefit from it.
And how can we resolve these issues? How can we resolve the myths and misconceptions and really allow for more communication around true service animals and how they provide service to their handler?
Yeah, the key component to this conversation is information that is correct and providing the public education. I mean, I would love to see an educational campaign from the government about this issue. That would be great. That would probably resolve some of these misconceptions. Will we get there? Probably not, but we're starting to through this podcast series. Sharing accurate information through social media is important. Having open conversations with your friends and your family and the public, that's important. Certainly for my clients who are experiencing discrimination because somebody or, on a repeated basis, they get denied access to places with their service animal, that is really deflating. And it's really problematic in the level of energy that it takes for these people to sort of fight this battle where the law is entirely on their side and when we're talking about their access to their service animal. But continuing the fight, continuing to spread correct information is key because educating the public is what we need.
And as in addition to that, we would love to have comments from all of our audience out there, whether you've experienced a problem or you've experienced a great experience with your service animal in an establishment. We would love to have your feedback. The more feedback we have, the better. I think that gets more information out into the public. And again, we will have the links for the public comment on the proposed changes for the Department of Transportation. Christy, thank you so much for your time today. It's been really great talking to you.
Thank you.
Empire State of Rights Closed Captioned has been brought to you by Disability Rights New York, your source for disability rights and advocacy. If you enjoyed our program, make sure to subscribe, like, and share this post. If there is a subject you would like us to discuss, please email podcast@drny.org or comment below. Tune in next Wednesday, where we'll bring you more information on disability rights in the state of New York. The closed caption version of this podcast is available on our YouTube channel. To listen to more Empire State of Rights closed captioned, follow us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify.